Picture this. You're scrolling through your phone at 2 a.m., heart racing from a work email that arrived hours ago. Your mind spirals through tomorrow's meetings, next week's deadlines, and that awkward conversation from 3 months ago that somehow feels relevant right now. Sound familiar? Here is what might shock you. This mental prison you're trapped in was perfectly diagnosed and solved over 2,000 years ago by a slave named Epictetus, who lived in chains yet possessed more freedom than most people today will ever experience. The paradox is staggering. We live in the most connected, informed, and materially abundant era in human history. Yet rates of anxiety, depression, and existential emptiness continue to skyrocket. We have more choices than any generation before us, yet we feel more trapped. We have access to all human knowledge, yet we're more confused about how to live. Why? The answer lies not in our circumstances, but in an invisible architecture of mental bondage we've constructed around ourselves, one so subtle, so pervasive, that we mistake it for reality itself. Today we're going to pull back the curtain on this elaborate illusion and discover why ancient Stoic philosophy isn't just historical curiosity, but perhaps the most practical psychological framework ever devised for navigating the chaos of modern existence. To understand why Stoicism holds such profound relevance today, we must first excavate the psychological foundations of our contemporary suffering. The human mind, evolved for surviving on ancient savannas, now finds itself thrust into a world of infinite stimuli, endless choices, and abstract threats that trigger the same fight-or-flight responses our ancestors used to escape lions. Consider the simple act of checking your phone. Your brain doesn't distinguish between a passive-aggressive text from a coworker and a genuine physical threat. The same neurochemical cascade that once helped humans outrun predators now fires in response to social media notifications, creating a state of chronic low-level anxiety that colors every moment of our existence. But the real tragedy isn't biological, it's psychological. From our earliest moments, we're taught to seek validation, security, and happiness in things we cannot control. A child learns that love is conditional on performance. A teenager discovers that social acceptance depends on fitting ever-shifting cultural norms. An adult realizes that career success hinges on market forces, office politics, and the whims of others. This creates what psychologists call external locus of control, a worldview where our well-being depends entirely on forces outside ourselves. We become what Marcus Aurelius called puppets of circumstance, dancing to strings pulled by others, by events, by the random chaos of existence itself. The symptoms are everywhere once you know how to look. The mother who derives her entire sense of worth from her children's achievements, living in constant terror that their failures reflect her inadequacy. The executive who works 80-hour weeks chasing a promotion that promises happiness but delivers only the next level of anxiety. The social media user who refreshes their feed compulsively, seeking digital validation to fill an internal void that no amount of likes can satisfy. Each of these behaviors represents the same fundamental error, the confusion between what we can control and what we cannot. This confusion isn't accidental, it's systematically reinforced by every institution in our society, from advertising that promises external solutions to internal problems, to educational systems that reward conformity over self-knowledge, to cultures that equate worth with external achievement. The Stoic philosophers Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and others approach this problem with the precision of surgeons and the depth of mystics. They understood that human suffering isn't primarily caused by external events, but by our judgments about those events. This insight, radical then and radical now, forms the cornerstone of what might be history's most practical philosophy. Epictetus, who spent much of his life as a literal slave before becoming one of Rome's most respected teachers, articulated this principle with brutal clarity. It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things. Think about the profound implications of this statement. If true, it means that freedom isn't a political condition, but a psychological one. It means that a slave can be freer than his master, that a person facing terminal illness can experience more peace than someone with perfect health who lives in constant fear of losing it. Carl Jung, the great depth psychologist, echoed this Stoic insight when he wrote about what he called the transcendent function, the ability to step back from our immediate reactions and observe them with detachment. Jung understood that most psychological suffering comes from identification with thoughts and emotions rather than recognition that we are the consciousness observing these mental phenomena. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, discovered in the most extreme circumstances what the Stoics had taught 2 millennia earlier. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Frankl's logotherapy and Stoic philosophy share the same foundational insight that meaning and peace come not from controlling external reality, but from exercising sovereignty over our internal responses. But here's where Stoicism reveals its psychological sophistication. Unlike philosophies that encourage detachment through denial or suppression, Stoicism advocates what we might call engaged acceptance. The Stoic doesn't pretend difficult emotions don't exist or that external events don't matter. Instead, they develop what Seneca called the view from above, the ability to see their immediate situation within the larger context of existence. This perspective shift is neurologically profound. Modern neuroscience has shown that when we activate the prefrontal cortex through practices like meditation or philosophical reflection, we literally change our brain's response patterns. The amygdala's fight or flight reactions become less dominant, while the regions associated with executive function and emotional regulation strengthen. In essence, Stoic practices rewire the brain for resilience, clarity, and peace. What happens when we fail to develop this inner sovereignty? The cost is far greater than most people realize, extending far beyond individual unhappiness to affect every relationship, every decision, every moment of our lives. Consider the executive who has tied her entire identity to professional success. When she faces criticism from her boss, she doesn't experience it as feedback about her work. She experiences it as an attack on her fundamental worth as a person. This identification with role creates what existentialist philosophers call bad faith, a form of self-deception where we pretend we have no choice but to be what others expect us to be. The price of this mental slavery manifests in countless ways. The parent who lives through their children's achievements, experiencing genuine distress when their child struggles, creating a psychological burden that actually hinders the child's development. The romantic partner who needs constant reassurance of love, whose anxiety about abandonment becomes the very behavior that pushes their partner away. The person who seeks happiness through consumption, always believing that the next purchase, the next experience, the next achievement will finally provide the peace that remains perpetually out of reach. Each of these patterns represents what Stoics called preferred indifference, things that are naturally preferable but don't determine our fundamental well-being. Success is preferable to failure, health to sickness, praise to criticism. But when we make our inner peace dependent on obtaining these preferred outcomes, we become slaves to forces beyond our control. This slavery is particularly insidious because it masquerades as normal life. We're so accustomed to the constant low-level anxiety of depending on external validation that we mistake it for the human condition itself. We develop what psychologists call learned helplessness, the belief that our emotional states are entirely at the mercy of circumstances. The metaphor that captures this condition most powerfully comes from Plato's cave allegory, but with a Stoic twist. We're not just prisoners watching shadows on the wall, we're prisoners who have become so identified with the shadows that we forget we're capable of turning around. We mistake our reactions for reality, our judgments for truth, our fears for wisdom. This mental imprisonment creates what Erich Fromm called the pathology of normalcy, a collective mental illness so widespread that it appears healthy. We live in a society of people frantically pursuing happiness, while systematically destroying the psychological conditions that make happiness possible. We seek security by trying to control the uncontrollable, create meaning by pursuing the meaningless, and find peace by engaging in the very mental activities that guarantee agitation. But here is where the story takes its crucial turn, the moment when ancient wisdom reveals its power to transform modern suffering. The Stoics discovered what they called the internal citadel, an inviolable space of freedom that exists within every human being, regardless of external circumstances. This isn't mere metaphor. It's a precise description of a psychological reality that modern neuroscience is only beginning to understand. The path to this citadel begins with a simple but revolutionary recognition. The vast majority of our suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our resistance to events. When we stop fighting reality and start working with it, we discover reserves of strength and peace we never knew we possessed. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his personal journal while campaigning on the harsh frontiers of the Roman Empire, captured this transformation beautifully. Confine yourself to the present. This is not advice to ignore the future or forget the past. It is recognition that power exists only in the present moment. The past is beyond change, the future beyond prediction. But this moment, this breath, this thought, this choice remains forever within our domain. The practical implications are staggering. When you truly internalize that you cannot control other people's opinions, you stop wasting energy on impression management and start focusing on character development. When you accept that you cannot guarantee specific outcomes, you stop procrastinating from fear of failure and start acting from integrity and purpose. When you recognize that you cannot prevent loss, you stop hoarding experiences and start fully engaging with what you have. This isn't passive resignation, it's active wisdom. The Stoic doesn't become indifferent to outcomes, but rather invests energy in the process rather than obsessing over results. Like a master archer who focuses entirely on proper form and release, knowing that the arrow's path is influenced by wind gravity and factors beyond control, the Stoic practitioner concentrates on what Epictetus called the work of a human being, thinking clearly, choosing wisely, and acting with virtue. Seneca described this transformation in terms that resonate with modern psychology as understanding of resilience and post-traumatic growth. Every new thing excites the mind, but a mind made stronger by experience is not easily moved. The Stoic develops what we might call anti-fragility, the capacity not merely to survive difficult experiences, but to be strengthened by them. This strength comes from a fundamental shift in how we define ourselves. Instead of identifying with our roles, our achievements, or our circumstances, we learn to identify with what the Stoics called our ruling reason, the observing consciousness that can witness thoughts and emotions without being overwhelmed by them. This is remarkably similar to what mindfulness practitioners call metacognition and what depth psychologists call the observing ego. The beauty of Stoic philosophy lies not in its abstract theories, but in its immediate applicability to the messiness of daily existence. Every traffic jam becomes an opportunity to practice patience. Every criticism becomes a chance to strengthen equanimity. Every loss becomes a teacher of impermanence and the preciousness of what remains. Consider how this works in practice. You're stuck in traffic, late for an important meeting. The non-Stoic mind immediately begins its familiar pattern: frustration at the traffic, anger at other drivers, anxiety about the meeting, self-criticism for not leaving earlier. Each of these reactions takes energy, accomplishes nothing, and makes the experience worse. The Stoic mind takes a different path. It recognizes that the traffic is a fact, not a personal attack. It accepts that being late is now likely, removing the energy drain of wishful thinking. It uses the unexpected time for reflection, planning, or simply observing the world with curiosity rather than judgment. Most importantly, it recognizes this moment as perfect practice for the larger challenges life will inevitably bring. This isn't about becoming emotionally numb or intellectually detached. It is about what William James called the will to believe, choosing to see each experience as an opportunity for growth rather than a threat to happiness. The Stoic develops what resilience researchers call cognitive flexibility, the ability to reframe challenges as opportunities, setbacks as feedback, and obstacles as the very path forward. The transformation extends into every area of life. Relationships become less about getting needs met and more about expressing love and loyalty regardless of reciprocation. Work becomes less about external recognition and more about crafting excellence for its own sake. Even aging and death lose their terror when viewed as natural processes rather than personal failures. This doesn't happen overnight. Like physical fitness, philosophical wisdom requires consistent practice and patience with the process. But the results, when they begin to manifest, are nothing short of miraculous. You discover that you can be happy without specific conditions being met. You learn that you can face uncertainty with curiosity rather than fear. Most remarkably, you realize that the peace you've been seeking through external achievement has been available internally all along. As we step back and survey this philosophical landscape, we begin to see our contemporary challenges with startling clarity. The anxiety disorders plaguing our generation, the depression epidemic among young people, the midlife crises that seem to strike with increasing frequency, all of these can be understood as variations on the ancient theme of seeking happiness in the wrong places. Social media, with its endless opportunities for comparison and validation seeking, represents perhaps the perfect anti-Stoic technology. It systematically directs our attention toward things we cannot control, other people's lives, opinions, and approval, while providing the illusion of connection without its substance. The result is exactly what Stoic philosophy would predict: increased anxiety, decreased satisfaction, and a growing sense of emptiness despite constant stimulation. The solution isn't to reject technology or retreat from modern life, but to approach it with philosophical wisdom. The Stoic uses social media as a tool rather than being used by it. They post when they have something valuable to contribute rather than seeking validation. They consume content that educates or inspires rather than feeds comparison and envy. Most importantly, they remember that their worth isn't determined by metrics, but by the quality of their character and choices. This philosophical approach to modern life creates what we might call practical transcendence, the ability to engage fully with contemporary culture while remaining anchored in timeless wisdom. The Stoic professional works diligently for promotion while remaining equanimous about the outcome. The Stoic parent invests deeply in their children's well-being while accepting that they cannot control their children's choices. The Stoic citizen engages in political action while recognizing that they cannot determine political outcomes. In each case, the Stoic mind finds what Buddhism calls the middle way, neither attachment nor indifference, but rather passionate engagement combined with philosophical detachment from results. This isn't contradiction, but rather the highest form of psychological sophistication. So here we are, you and I, at the end of this exploration, but perhaps at the beginning of something far more significant. Every word you've read, every insight that has resonated, every moment of recognition you've experienced, these are not accidents but invitations. Invitations to step out of the mental prison you may not have realized you were in. Invitations to discover the freedom that no circumstance can destroy, no person can grant or take away, no achievement can provide or failure can eliminate. The question isn't whether these ideas are intellectually interesting. The question is whether you're ready to live them. Are you prepared to trade the familiar suffering of mental slavery for the unfamiliar responsibility of inner freedom? Are you willing to stop waiting for circumstances to change and start changing your relationship to circumstances? This isn't about perfection or immediate transformation. The Stoic path is one of practice, not performance. Every day offers dozens of small opportunities to choose wisdom over reactivity, virtue over convenience, long-term character over short-term comfort. Each choice builds on the previous one, creating momentum toward the kind of life the ancients called eudaimonia, not happiness as pleasure, but happiness as flourishing, as living in accordance with our deepest values and highest potential. The beautiful paradox of this path is that by giving up the attempt to control what we cannot control, we discover unprecedented control over what actually matters. By accepting what is, we gain the power to influence what might be. By releasing attachment to specific outcomes, we become more effective at creating positive change. By finding peace within ourselves, we become a source of peace for others. The ancient Stoics understood something that modern psychology is rediscovering, that suffering is optional, peace is a skill, and wisdom is not a destination but a way of traveling. They discovered that the same mind that can create hell can also create heaven, that the same consciousness that generates anxiety can generate serenity, that the same heart that knows despair can know unshakable joy. This wisdom isn't preserved in dusty philosophy books for academic debate. It's alive, practical, and waiting for you to claim it. The only question remaining is, what are you waiting for? The circumstances are already perfect. The time is now. The teacher has been speaking for 2,000 years, and finally, you're ready to listen. The Stoics have a saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Your philosophical tree, the development of wisdom, resilience, and inner freedom, is waiting to be planted. Not when life becomes easier, not when you have more time, not when you feel ready, but now in this moment, with whatever circumstances you're facing. Take the first step. Notice your next automatic reaction to something beyond your control. Pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, is this helping me become who I want to be? That pause, that question, that choice, it's already the beginning of your liberation. The ancient wisdom is timeless. Your opportunity to live it is right now. What will you choose?